Guys, how are you? All right, we're going to finish up our story, The Spice of Life, by answering some questions here. We're going to do some of them together, and then you're going to try a few on your own, okay? All right, so one thing you might want to do is take a minute to reread the story, okay? So if you need to pause the video and reread, go ahead and do that. I'm not going to read it out loud again. You guys can do that, or you can listen to the lesson from before so that you can hear the story again, but we're not going to take the time to reread it right now. Okay, so we're going to use our race strategy today to answer some questions about the passage, The Spice of Life. Okay, we have to use text evidence, so we have to find our answers either within the text or how the text can prove our answer is correct. Okay, all right, so I'm going to start by looking at my first question here. Okay, let's see, it says, what sparked an interest in sea exploration? Okay, sea exploration is when people got on their ships and they started looking for new countries and new parts of the world. All right, so if you can think back in our passage, we're going to go back into our passage and we're going to try to find what was sparking that interest in sea exploration. Okay, let's think about, first of all, what is this passage all about? It's about spices. Okay, who wanted spices? Ask yourself that. People who wanted spices, they were the Europeans. Okay, Europeans did not have any of the spices that other parts of the world had, and their food tasted very bland or very boring. Okay, think about if you don't put salt on something, it's kind of bland. So they wanted spices to make their food, their meals more interesting, but they had to figure out a way to get there. Okay, so right here, I'm going to go to the beginning. It says, look at Europe in the 1400s. This saying was literal. Life was all about spices. Spices were important because middle and upper classes wanted them. Back then, there were few choices for foods. Foods from the Americas had not yet been discovered. Okay, they talk a little bit about what Europeans had a diet that lacked variety. They relied on meat, but there were no freezers. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to just skip a little bit here. They used salt to dry and cure it. Eventually, salted meat lost its appeal. Spices like pepper, clove, and ginger helped the bland food taste better. Okay. All right. So what actually sparked the interest in this sea exploration? Okay. Europeans wanted what? They wanted spices. Okay. I'm going to keep reading just a little bit more. Explorers and their patrons wanted to find a better route to the spices. They set their sights on the Spice Islands. These were islands in Indonesia. They also wanted to reach Africa and India. Exotic flavors were there. They could be brought back to liven up meals. Of course, there were people living in these places where spices grew. These people knew they ruled the spice trade. They charged high prices. They knew Europeans couldn't get the spices any other way. Most traders made the prices so high that only the rich could afford their goods. That wasn't all. A series of religious wars shut down the traders' land routes. A sea route was needed. So right here, it's talking about a sea route, the sea exploration. So what are some of the reasons that they needed to use the sea to get to where they wanted to go? Okay. So one of them was a series of religious wars. I'm going to highlight in yellow. Shut down the traders' land routes. Okay, that's one place. Let's see, or one reason. Also, what were the people who lived in the places with spices doing? Okay, they were charging high prices for their spices. So to carry them all the way to Europe, once they got there, they were so high that only the rich Europeans could afford those. Okay, so they wanted to make sure that the Europeans could get to these places, purchase them, and then bring them back for a cheaper price. All right, so we're going to go now back to our passage, okay? What sparked an interest in sea exploration? All right, first of all, What sparked an interest? What do we know? Spices sparked an interest. Now I'm going to make sure I spell all of these right because they're in my question. In sea exploration. Okay, that's my basic answer. What is my answer? Spices. Okay, and you can see I restated here. Spices sparked an interest in sea exploration. Now, what does the passage say? Okay, so I'm going to write now. The passage says that, now I'm looking at my passage, that traders charged high prices for spices and religious wars shut down land routes. So they couldn't go by land, so they had to figure out how to go by sea. Okay, so what I highlighted here, this is my text evidence. The traders were charging high prices, and a series of religious wars had shut down the traders' land routes. Okay? All right, so let's look and reread our question, our answer, make sure it makes sense. What sparked an interest in sea exploration? Spices sparked an interest in sea exploration. The passage says that traders charged high prices for spices and religious wars shut down land routes. Okay, does that make sense? All right, sounds good. Okay, so going on to the next question, here we go. Choose one invention from the article and explain how sea trade sparked the idea. Okay, all right, so I'm going to go back to those two words that we had highlighted from the first time we went through this passage. We had caravels and astrolabe. Okay, these were two inventions that were invented because of the spice trade. Okay, so the caravels, if we look back at our cards, here we go. Caravels, what is it? It's a ship. And what do we know about this ship? Is that it could withstand rough waters and long trips. Okay, if you look at a map from Portugal all the way to Indonesia or India or Africa, those are long sea trips. They took months, not days, but months to get to where you needed to go. They were going to go through rough waters. They were going to go on very long trips. So they had to have ships that could really withstand that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and choose caravels because it only asks me for one invention. Okay, so I'm going to restate. Okay, my answer. All right, one invention. Make sure I spell invention right. From the article was a caravel, or, and I'm going to define it, a ship that could withstand long trips and rough waters. Okay, one thing I didn't do was I didn't highlight it, so I'm going to go back here and highlight that. It tells me what a caravel is right here. It's a new ship. They could withstand rough waters and long trips. Okay, now, there's a second part to my question, but I'm going to read the first part first. I'm going to read the question again. Choose one invention from the article and explain how sea trade sparked the idea. Okay, one invention from the article was a caravel, or a ship that could withstand long trips and rough waters. Okay, so now that sounds pretty good, but now I have to explain how sea trade sparked the idea. So here I have to use, it doesn't tell me how in my story how the idea was sparked, okay? But what do we know? Okay, so Europeans needed ships to get halfway around the world. Trips were long. And what else do you think they might have been? They were definitely long and probably dangerous. So I'm going to add that. Okay, so I had to use a little bit of inferring here to finish this question. I had to use some clues from the story to kind of help me answer this question. I know they're trying to get excuse me, trying to get spices from a very long ways away, and they were going to have to travel on long trips through rough waters, so that is why they needed new ships to get them there. Okay? All right, so we answered 2 of these questions together. All right, what I would like for you guys to do is try to answer the next 3 questions. Okay, I'm going to read them. Why were spices particularly useful for the European diet? I want you to think about, what does it say about the people in Europe? They mainly eat meat. That's what their diet is mostly composed of. And what was so awful about just eating meat? Okay, so think about that. The next one, how are religious wars related to the need for sea exploration? That one you're going to find right there in the text. Okay, so use that text evidence to help you. And the last one, other than making spices more available, what other impact did sea exploration have on the world? Okay, so that one is a little bit maybe trickier, but if you look in this last part of the story, you're gonna find a whole bunch of text evidence to help you answer that question. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna let you guys try your very best to answer these. Make sure, if you need to, go back and reread the story. Okay, and see if you can't figure that out. So I'm going to put this here for just a second if you want to reread it. Okay, and then I'm going to move this one right over here so you can see the questions. Okay, all right, so you guys have a great week. You just have a couple more weeks of school. I know you guys can do it. You guys have been, your teachers have said you've been on your computers and going to your Google Meets, and I know it's no fun, but keep on doing it just for a couple more weeks, and then it's summertime. Okay? All right, I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.